we'll start with, remember last week we were looking at the Yoga Sutras. We didn't quite finish that discussion. And so what I propose to do today is we finish that discussion. There's only very little left to discuss there about a couple of sutras. And then we'll move on to thinking about the problems with the karma theory. Some of the problems were the ones you guys came up with last time. And there's a couple of other things that have been discussed in the literature that we're going to talk about. Let's think back to last week. What we were talking about was the Yoga Sutras. The first one that we read was a proof for transmigration and rebirth, remember? The will to live. The others that we looked at were explaining the process of how karma exactly works, what are the causes, and what are the effects of karma. Okay, the one I want to look at today is, remember, from week one, we've talked about this assumption that the Indians, and you'll see the Buddhists have as well, that all existence is bound up with suffering. Why do they think this? Sutras 14 and 15 on page, let's have a look, 47, discuss exactly that point. So 14 is just talking about, the effects of the sutra. So last time we talked about the causes of the karmic residues. The causes were, remember, intentions, the immediate consequences of the act, as well as the physical act itself. All three things matter to what is the quality, whether it's good quality, that is meritorious, as they call them, or demeritorious. What do they have to say about the effects of these? These fruitions, so that is the fruition of the karmic residue. These fruitions have joy or extreme anguish as results in accordance with the quality of their causes, whether merit or demerit. So what are these? These, that is the birth, length of life, and the kind of experience. So that's what karmic residues affect. The birth, by birth here, it means the caste. The caste you are born into, the length of life, and the kind of experiences you're going to have during the lifetime. All that is determined by the karmic residues, and this is what they have to say. Those with merit as cause, so those that are positive karmic residues, have pleasure as a result. Those with demerit, negative karmic residues, have pain as a result. And just as the nature of this pain is counteractive, so for the yogin, even at the moment of pleasure in an object, there is nothing but counteractive pain. So the point is that for the yogin, or the wise man or the sage, yogi is a wise man, for someone like that, even in the moment of pleasure, there is nothing but pain. How is this accounted for? The answer is given in Sutra 15, if you read it. It's difficult to understand, but the last bit is useful. As being the pains which are mutations and anxieties and subliminal impressions. So pains, bad karma could take effect in any of these ways. Mutations, not having, the right kind of physical body and capacities, anxieties, and subliminal impressions. So even at the level of unconscious stuff, that hangs around, that might be a cause of a lot of pain, according to these. So they not only say that it is the physical, the karmic residues take shape in the physical form of the body, but also in the kind of, so they say mutations, anxieties, the sorts of things that one tends to fear, the sorts of things that one tends to worry about, that makes for painful existence in and of itself at a psychological level. And they also talk about subliminal impressions, so even, below the psychological level, so to say, things that are not clear to you may be a cause of a lot of pain. It's the sort of thing that happens. The kind of example to keep in mind is soldiers, when they're fighting on the front, they might not realize how traumatic these experiences are, but they leave impressions on their subconscious or unconscious in a way that, they get tormented, in spite of not having a very clear sense of, what exactly is the cause of anxiety. And the Hindus, even in those times, are, able to sort of make these kinds of distinctions. And by reason of the opposition of the fluctuations of the aspect to the discriminating mind, to the discriminating, all is nothing but pain. So for the person who can really see the difference, all is nothing but the pain. I want to read a little bit of the commentary to explain this. I think the one on the next page is useful. So on page 48. Thus it has been said, and they use the word there, undifferentiated consciousness. Undifferentiated consciousness just means ignorance. So for those without knowledge of the theory of karma, without knowledge of the Hindu scriptures. So, for the ignorant, pleasure, there is pleasure in an object of sense. That which is the subsidence of the organs because of their satiation with enjoyments is pleasure. After there has been a craving, the failure to subside is pain. So, simple idea, if you crave something, let's suppose one is a smoker, there is a craving for, one is addicted to smoking, there's a craving to go and have a smoke, and once you do have a smoke, there is some pleasure, but after, if you cannot satisfy the craving because Monash University does not let you smoke on its campus, and you have to go all the way out, and there is not enough time to go and do it, then the failure to subside causes the pain because the craving remains. But this is what they say. And by the application of the organs to enjoyments. So the more you apply your sense organs to enjoying, to satiating them, to thinking, I'll just satisfy this craving, and then after that, I will feel better. So what the Hindus have to say, the more you satiate your cravings, the more it causes. So, and by the application of organs to enjoyments, one cannot make oneself free from thirst. Just by satiating the needs of your sense organs, your cravings, you cannot make yourself free from thirst. Why is this? Since passions increase because of the application of enjoyments. The more you satiate, the more addicted you get to that kind of pleasure, whatever it might be. And the skill of the organs also increases, and you want more and more, and you want better and better. Therefore, application to the enjoyment of pleasure is not a way to approach freedom. Giving in to your cravings, satisfying your desires, satisfying your thirst, so to say, is not a way to approach freedom from thirst of objects. Surely, one aiming at pleasure and permeated by objects. So someone who's just, aiming at pleasure, permeated by objects means, hankering after sense objects, that particular Gucci bag or, that designer outfit, or a cigarette or whatever it is that takes your fancy. So surely one aiming at pleasure and permeated by objects is sunk in the deep bog of pain, like the man, while in fear of the scorpion's poison, is bitten by a poisonous snake. So you don't want that little bit of pain. To avoid that little bit of pain, you give in to the craving, but all that causes is further pain and further pain. And so the way to approach freedom from pain is not by giving in to one's cravings, but rather trying to do without the things that you're craving. That alone is the way to freedom. What do people think? Is that good enough for saying why all why all existence must be painful, because all existence on this earth is tied up with satisfying, satisfying the lust we have for various objects of our senses, nice things, beautiful food, nice wine, and so on and so forth. And these Hindus are complaining, well, satiating your senses and giving them what they crave for, it is not the way to get pleasure, because that will only increase the thirst. Or it's like, you're trying to avoid being bitten by a little poisonous animal, but you're, sinking deeper in the bog and being possibly like being stung by or bitten by a poisonous snake. Any comments on that? Is that a good argument for thinking all existence is pain? No? Why not?
Well, I think it just assumes that we're very, first very little faith in humankind. It's like we're very childish. Like if you enjoy something, you'll be sad if it gets taken away. Sometimes, you'll enjoy something and you know it's not going to happen again. You get taken away, and you're just happy that you lived it.
Mm-hmm.
Not necessarily crave forever sense.
Mm-hmm. Do you think, just satiating your desires, it does not always create more craving, because there is a sense of, perhaps a bit of reasoning we do, this is not the sort of thing I can afford or I can have every day, skydiving or whatever it is that might take one's fancy. One does it once in a while and then thinks, yep, that's it. Wanted to experience this, done it, been there, and I'll move on. So you think, we do have the ability to temper our desires, given what the circumstances are, whether it might be financial. But isn't there going to be a pain? We're sort of suppressing our desire. I mean, if it is something so enjoyable, you'd want to do it again. And the Hindu point is, you might be able to do it. You might be able to suppress the desire, but it will be cause of some pain. That's the basic point that they want to make. They're not saying that we are, completely sort of guided by our desires and have no self-control whatsoever. But self-control is hard work. Self-control is painful. And so, any way or the other, you're going to be in pain. And as long as one is on earth, so that's the point. Earthly existence is bound up with pain. And while one is living on earth, one cannot avoid this. Any other reactions to this? All existence is pain then? We all agree? Not quite. Okay, well, we'll leave that there. And then just the very last point, and which is quite simple. I'm not going to go and read Sutras 10 and 11. This is about, now we've talked about the causes of karmic residues, the effects of karmic residues, and we've also talked about, why they think all existence is bound up with suffering. The last point that is discussed in the passages from the sutras that I have in the readings for you discusses how do we get rid of karmic residues. Remember, the way to get to moksha is not to accumulate lots and lots of positive residues. The way to get to liberation or moksha is to get your karmic balance to zero. Right? How do we do that? We cannot get positive and negative residues to cancel each other out. You have to, according to these Hindus, you have to suffer the results of the negative residues, and you have to enjoy the rewards of the positive residues. That you cannot escape. Then it might seem that, because you'll always be sort of tied to this cycle of birth and rebirth. They say no, and that's where the practice of yoga, yoga as we understand it, as a physical and mental discipline comes in. So in the Sutras 10 and 11, very cryptically again, and that's why I'm not going into reading them, they explain this by using the agricultural analogy. So the idea is you think of karmic residues as seeds you're carrying, right? And, you know, these seeds need, if you like, the right kind of conditions in order to propagate, in order to bear fruit. You need to have the right kind of soil, you need to provide water, there should be sunshine, the right weather, you know, all of those things are required. So once you've acquired the karmic residues, you think of them now as seeds. Once you have the seeds, what is the way of getting rid of these karmic residues? So they say one thing that they say meditation, which is a discipline of the mind, is a way of, you know, shaking off some of the karmic residues. So it's like the analogy that is given in the text, and trust me, I'm not making it up. It's like seeds, you know, or little particles that might stick to a cloth or on a bedspread. You drop something, you know, there are little seeds that have stuck. How do you get rid of them? By shaking them hard. Meditation, physical exercise, yoga, that is the first step of working towards meditation. All the physical exercises that are popular as yoga are not just meant to stop at the physical level. The idea is always you progress through these various stages. You first get complete control of your body through the various yoga asanas. That asana means positions. The various, you know, yoga positions you do, you get complete control of your body. And the next step, you know, in the Yoga Sutras is to do meditation. Why is meditation important? It is a way of getting rid of some karmic residues. So that's one important thing. And the higher stages of meditation, you know, it doesn't quite stop there. Meditation practice gets you to learn how to get rid of karmic residues. The higher stages of meditation, which are called contemplating the self, you know, where you see, apparently, haven't been that far. Apparently, it is meant to be, you know, you see yourself one with the self. You don't see any distinctions in reality. That's the highest state of, you know, the Hindu way of meditating. Gets you to that state that you see yourself one with everyone around you. Not just everyone, with everything, the whole physical world. And that, they say, you know, getting to that highest state is like burning the seeds. So that is exactly what is said in Yoga Sutra 11, contemplation, you know, just to read it very quickly so that I'm not, the fluctuations of these should be escaped by means of contemplation. So it's like, you know, you sterilize those karmic residues by burning them. And meditation and the higher stages of contemplation meditation works as a means of getting rid of some of them. Contemplation works as a means of burning all the, you know, it's as if the body temperature, not that the karmic residues are carried by the body, but if you're thinking of them as seeds, and you can think of the soul as, you know, some kind of substance which is holding on to those seeds, you know, in the higher stages of meditation, in contemplation, it is so hot that everything burns away. That's the kind of idea, right? So these are just means of how to get rid of, how to, you know, start moving towards. And none of these are meant to be easy. You know, don't think that the message is, fine, I'll go and join a yoga class, and don't take me to be suggesting that, you know, then I'll do some meditation, then I'll get to the higher stages and I'll get rid of it. This could take several lifetimes. It's you know, it is a very difficult discipline. So don't think that, right, no more university. As soon as I leave here at 12, I know how to escape pain. That's not the idea. I'm just telling you what their story is. Okay, I think that's all I have to say about the Yoga Sutras. Any further points? No? So let's move on to talking about some of the problems. So there are four problems I have put on your handout. The first is the problem of the logical paradox, and that is something that came up briefly in class last week, but I want to talk about two different versions of it in a minute. This is very dangerous. need to tell them. But not trip. The other concern is that people have often raised in the literature is the karma theory deterministic? You know, if it determines your birth, if it determines the kind of being you're going to be born as, your duties, do you have any choice? Is there any notion of choice in the karma theory? Is there room for free will in the karma theory? That's the second worry. I'm going to address that. The third worry is about the metaphysical baggage. We cannot believe in this theory unless we take on board the doctrines of rebirth and transmigration. We talked about their argument for it last week, but we also realized it doesn't quite work. So that's the third. The fourth thing is, okay, even if the karma theory can get rid of, let's suppose, can get rid of all these problems. So the metaphysical worries, the logical paradox, even if, we come to an agreement that these can be defined away. The question I want to leave you with this week is you've heard about karma theory. By the end of this week, you will have heard about it for 3 weeks. Is that something desirable? Is that something that gives you a good moral ideal or not? It's one thing to say, now I understand it. It's one thing to say, yes, it makes sense. It's not logically inconsistent. The metaphysical baggage is a worry, but, there's something to be said for it. We can understand it. It's coherent and all that. Once we do that, is that something we want to live by? So the more pointed question is that something anyone should want to live by? Hindu or not, is that a moral ideal that you want to, so to take an example for those of you who've done some philosophy before, the utilitarians say, the one principle by which to live your life, utilitarianism is a moral theory, talked about in many philosophy classes. The one thing to live by is you must act so that your actions, you must act so that your actions are such that they help to satisfy the desires or satisfy preferences of all those who are affected by the action, right? So act in a way so that it leads to maximum desire satisfaction. Of course, it cannot be everyone's desire is satisfied, but maximal desire satisfaction or maximal preference satisfaction of all those who are affected by your actions. So that's, could you pass that? That's the basic idea in utilitarianism. They give you one principle, and then the question is, can I always act like that? Is that a good principle to live by? Some people question it and say, that is a consequentialist approach. Consequences cannot be the only thing that matter. What makes a moral action good is also the intention, so on and so forth. So there can be lots of debate about it. So in the same way, at the end of this week, one question I want you to think about is, whatever we've said about the karma theory, whatever the Hindus have said about it, do you think it's a good moral ideal for human beings, for me and you, for anyone, in fact, to live by, right? Let's move on to first some of the problems. So remember, the issue of logical paradox was duty for the sake of duty. Why should I, that's the dictum in the Gita, do your action just because it's your duty. But if I do duty for the sake of duty, it seems that why should I follow this dictum, duty for the sake of duty? Because that's the only way to get moksha. So rather than duty for the sake of duty, it becomes duty for the sake of moksha. So really, even though the Gita says what we must do is duty for the sake of duty alone, that's not quite right, because the deeper reason for following this dictum is that we have to do duty for the sake of moksha. Duty for the sake of duty for the sake of moksha. So really it is moksha which is what we desire. It's the highest end of man. That's what we desire. So to say that desireless action gets you to moksha, or desireless action is the path to moksha, is not really a consistent idea. So one problem is, how do we resolve this paradox in the Gita? The second one, as I said before, is the karma theory deterministic? The third one is about the baggage. So, given what we know about science, given what we know about our world, it seems very difficult to believe in rebirth, transmigration, or so on. I mean, we looked at the Yoga Sutra argument last week, but the upshot was the theory of evolution can give a better explanation of why we have the fear of death. Their argument was the fear of death cannot be explained, you must have been reborn, you must be reborn, you must have experienced death before. No, it doesn't quite work. The best way to explain the best way to explain the fear of death, a better explanation of the fear of death, is given by the theory of evolution. I'm going to try and sort of run with this idea and see whether we can sort of reinterpret, if you like, the notions of rebirth and transmigration in a way so that they do not, they're not obviously misfitting our so-called scientific conception of the world. Now, that was not the Hindu intention, but let us see if we can succeed. So here's the thought. Rather than thinking about an individual being reborn, the same individual being reborn, we can think of karma theory as the next generation being reborn. So, and I think this is not that far from the intention of the theory, because the theory never says that you will be reborn as the same person. I mean, in fact, the theory says you might be even born as a cooking pot, as we saw last week, right? So there is no suggestion that it'll be the same person coming back in any sense. You could take any form. You could be a material object, you could be a plant, you could be an animal, you could be a human, or you could even be a god, God with a little g, some extra powers, and so on and so forth. So you could be superhuman, let us say. All of those are possibilities. So it's not the idea. The karma theory is not suggesting that the same individual will be reborn. And we can think of it as, the kinds of actions that the parents do, the sorts of actions that the parents do affects the next generation, affects their offspring. And there's lots of scientific evidence for that. When you're pregnant, if you're smoking, that causes birth deformities. There is some evidence for that. Alcohol is bad, and so on and so forth. Even for males, the quality of sperm is meant to be bad if you're drinking too much or smoking too much. There's all sorts of evidence of that. So I'm just using physical things, but you could also say that in the text, in the Hindu text, they talk about the kind of literature that the mother reads while she's pregnant affects the dispositions of the child, the fetus, and the infant in the future. So it kind of gives you the idea. We should not think of karma. Karma cannot require that the same individual is born. Karma only requires that someone who's going to be born on account of our actions is going to suffer or be rewarded, given the sorts of lives we've led. I mean, you can think of the kind of environmental concern that we have for future generations. If we don't do something about our actions right now, our future generations, 50 years hence or 500 years hence, the world is going to be a very different. So that's why people say we have to take responsibility, right? We have to do something like that. Makes perfect sense on the karma account, right? You have to take responsibility for future generations, not for you, not the same individual, but you have to take responsibility for future generations. So that's a way of, reinterpreting. I'm not suggesting this was this their real intention. I'm suggesting this is a way of reinterpreting the theory so you could see that, or you can understand that's not completely crazy idea that these Hindus seem to have. What do you think of this reinterpretation? Sound sensible? Does the theory sound more acceptable? Does this reinterpretation make it more acceptable for anyone? Yeah?
I don't think it does. It makes it more coherent inside, but morally it's still very bizarre that you could be born with some defect and say, oh yeah, that was three generations back, I was saying there.
Yeah.
It's just a bit weird how that passes on. Just as obviously scientifically it's more coherent.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Any other reactions? No? Yeah?
I think it does actually makes more sense to me, because what you said about being responsible for your actions, I feel like we're pretty, you only think of your lifetime, and you're like, oh well, 50 years ago you did that, so I don't care what happens. But then if you take that responsibility that you as a human who will, even if you're not reborn and you're dead, like you don't
Yeah.
know that, but you're still responsible for what's happening next to your kids. And even if you don't have kids, but the people what they are left with, and I
Yeah.
think you're the person who does, maybe you're not like full on responsible, but you do have a duty, I guess,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
to the human race.
Yeah, to the human race, or whichever kind of race we evolve into being. There seems to be some sense of making sense of. So I'm, yeah,
If the karmic residue takes some time to
mature.
mature and to come into effect in somebody's life, and you accept that it's deterministic in the sense that you're inheriting something that you consciously didn't do for a past life, then why should you have any responsibility for future generations if the cycle continues without moksha for thousands of years?
Good point. And that kind of brings me to the second worry. So I'll move on to the second worry. I'm more tempted by, that kind of view of karma, that, we have to think about a responsibility to the future, whatever kind of beings there might be in the future.
Do you think like it gives us responsibility for even now? So like, cause you're like, oh, like the souls, like my soul could have contributed to this future that I'm living right now. So
Yeah.
it gives you a sense of responsibility
Yeah.
to change now as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So, both of these points, your point and your point, gets me exactly to the next bit about, discussing the determinism issue and also discussing the, so there's another point I have, but I'll come back to it later. Doesn't matter. The determinism issue is very important. Here's a detail about the karma theory that is actually discussed in one of the papers that didn't come out in the Yoga Sutras, which is important to, explain. So according to the karma theory, karmic residues, they're positive and negative, but they're of three kinds. They talk about three kinds. So first is called prarabdha. The Sanskrit terms are on your handout, but, concentrate on getting the idea, not the Sanskrit. So prarabdha karma is one kind of karma which is responsible for the kind of form, the kind of birth, the kind of being you are right now. So karmic residues that have already taken shape, taken fruition, are prarabdha karma, those that have borne fruit, right? That's one kind of karma. Sanchit karma, the second kind, is the ones you've acquired on account of your past actions. Now, past actions here is an open-ended notion. It could be in this life, what you did yesterday or the day before, so on. It could be a previous life. Sanchit is what you've acquired in the past and that you're carrying with you. That still has to bear fruit. That's the second kind. Third is agami. Agami is residues you're going to acquire on account of actions you're going to do. right? So there are three kinds of residues. One that have already borne fruit and are responsible for the kind of person, physically as well as mentally, as well as subliminally, that I am. Sanchit, that I already have acquired on account of my actions in the past, and I have to do something about those. And third, Agami, is the ones I will acquire in the future on account of my actions. So now think about it. The Hindus are going to say about Agami, about the ones actions you still got to do and ones you will still acquire, you have complete freedom. You can choose to do anything, responsibly, irresponsibly, according to your duty, good actions with good intentions, so on and so forth. So with the third kind, Agami, you have complete freedom. You can make the decision right now how you will act. With the ones you've acquired, Sanchit, well, there are ways of dealing with those. We just talked about one of the ways that the Hindus suggested. We have some control over those. We can, get into the practice. And think of this as one path. We can get into the practice of meditation and contemplation, and that would be one way of getting rid of the Sanchit, the ones we've already acquired. So the only ones that we're kind of really stuck with are the prarabdha. That's the present birth, the present being that I am. And that kind of determinism, is that really bad? I mean, all of us, no matter which background, what theory you believe in, all of us, given our physical and mental capabilities, have some limitation or the other, don't we? We cannot do anything we like. Freedom, exercising your free will, not being determined, doesn't amount to I can do anything I like. We are constrained by our bodies. We are constrained by our physical and our mental abilities. I might want to, 10 o'clock next Tuesday, I might decide I don't want to get the lift or walk down the stairs to come to this lecture. My office is on the 6th floor. I just want to fly down. I feel like flying down. Well, it's going to be a disaster. There are physical limitations I have. That's not just going to happen. No determinism in there, right? I mean, that's the way of the world. There is some of the things that we can do are constrained by the kinds of beings we are. We cannot fly. Well, I know people do skydiving and free falling and all that. But, we only fall down. I cannot, like an eagle, decide one day, this is what. So what the prarabdha karma is really talking about, the limitations we have because of our current form, really not deterministic. So I don't think, this is one point I feel very strongly about. I don't think the theory is deterministic. The theory is talking about constraints on action, but constraints on action doesn't amount to determinism. What you are constrained to do, given your mental abilities, I mean, this is how, let me be honest about it, this is what they will use to justify the caste system. So, why are only the Brahmins or why are only people of the Brahmin caste allowed to teach? Because they have superior mental capacities than the rest of us. That's what they say. Now, I'm not saying that's justified, but they're talking about capabilities, capacities that you have on account of your birth, and they constrains the sort of actions that are suited to your caste, so to say. That constrains the sort of actions that are suited to your caste. So if you are the Brahmins, we can go the other end and say, Brahmins might be very sharp mentally, but they are certainly not suited to, lots of physical activity and being a warrior or being a Kshatriya. They will do very badly. If a Brahmin suddenly decides they want to compete in the Olympics, that's going to be bad news, because they're just not physically capable. Not everyone who decides they want to go and compete in the Olympics is allowed to do that, even in today's world. You have to pass certain tests and meet get to a certain record before you can even be considered to compete, right? So it's not really, I mean, the theory is really not that deterministic at all. It's just talking about physical and mental constraints, and just having those constraints does not mean determinism in the least. Yeah?
So in regards to the caste system, would you say it's almost a metaphor that's been misread? In the sense that Varnas are set up as constraints on what humans can achieve from birth because of different traits that they've inherited. But that's not to say that that should happen in practice based on the Varnas
Yeah.
that the texts talk about.
Yeah.
So they've been misinterpreted as rules rather than
Dispositions. Yeah. So here's an example, and it is in your study guide. When I sort of start talking about the karma theory, here's an example, and this is again, the Indian literature is a huge literature. So some of them are more, if you like, academic texts like the Yoga Sutras, but the Gita, the Puranas, and all that literature is like stories we tell children, myths. Every culture has a whole lot of these. So here's one of the stories from one of those myths, and think about what it says about the caste system. So there's a child. He asks his mother. He's really keen on studying. He really wants to study. And he asks his mother, I want to go to school. I want to go to the school of such and such a teacher. I explained how that worked. You needed to be a Brahmin and you needed to be a certain age. So this child is really, really keen, and he wants to go and say, so he asks his mother, who's my dad? Because, you get your caste, your surname is sort of indicative of your caste, and that's usually your father's name. And so he says, who is my father? Because I would like to go to school. And the mother says, simply, I do not know the answer. I do not know who the father is. Nothing more is said, whether she was a prostitute or whatever. Does not matter. That's the answer that the mother gives. And the child goes to the teacher, goes to the Gurukul, and, goes up to the teacher and says, I would like to study. And the teacher, of course, asks the obvious question. Which caste do you belong to? Who is your father? Where do you come from? And the child says, my mother tells me that she does not know. And the teacher says back, you speak the truth. You must be a Brahmin. You're in. Right? So that's just the disposition to speak the truth is part of, it's one of the traits that a Brahmin is likely to have, and that gives you a sense of that the caste system was not really a rigid system. It gives you a sense. There are other stories which will go the other way. Lots and lots of other stories in our myths as well. But they're positive stories there too. So that might give you an idea that, it might not have been a very rigid system in olden times. It's sort of lost its hold. Even now, it's softened up as a very rigid caste system. And so it depends on, how it's interpreted at a certain time by a certain group of people living in that culture. I don't think any text can completely constrain your way of life. There is always a matter of interpretation. So that's just one idea, to keep in mind. And that's exactly the idea. The kind of dispositions you have are suited to your birth. And so those dispositions will take fruit. You will be an athlete. Perhaps, you will be, if you are, physically very strong and very athletic, you will sign up for the army. You will end up where you need to be. That's their idea. You should not go against your grain, so to say. If you go against your grain, it's going to be bad for you. You're going to get negative karma, and it's going to be bad for society. You're not going to be able to flourish. The society won't flourish if we all do other than what we are best suited for. That's one way of thinking about it. Very positive way of thinking about it. With a pinch of salt, take what I say with a pinch of salt. That's one interpretation of the theory. Okay, before I move to the logical paradox, there is just one thing I want to say, which I put on the first side of the handout as concerns, which I did not mention because the way the discussion went in class. sort of led me to the second point. One of the things that really, I mean, both the things I've been saying about determinism, about, a softer interpretation of the caste system, about thinking about karma as an intergenerational thing, all sound positive. Before we move to the logical paradox, let me sort of put forward a concern that I think we need to have and we should have, and people have discussed it. Karma proposes to be a theory which gives a moral explanation as well as a natural explanation of the world. So it's not just giving you a natural explanation of, the way people are, what kind of bodies we have, why are some things inanimate and why are some things animate and so on. Why does this person have a good life and that person suffers so much, so on and so forth. It's not only, giving you a natural explanation. It is building in, a moral theory in this. Why is Manima not tall and slim? That's something she really would like to have been. I've got this thing about being tall. Why is not on account of past karma? Why she got black hair or blonde hair or so, on account of past. Everything that happens, karma is that kind of explanation. Anything that happens can be explained on account of karma. Because remember, the sutra says the kinds of experiences you have, whether this class, coming to this class, you're enjoying the 2 hours or suffering, well, it's not really because of me. It's on your account of karma. It's what you did in the past. That's what explains the sort of experience you're having. It's got nothing to do with me. I'm having a good time, but that's because I've got lots and lots of positive karmas, right? So that's the kind of thing that they do. They give you an explanation for everything. And one of the assumptions here is that the universe is morally just. Nothing will go wrong. Nothing will happen by accident. There is no notion of luck. The natural world, so to say, because the kind of person being you're born as is not just a result of a mutation or an accident that happened. Somewhere in the evolution, it can't just be, an accidental event. Everything that happens because of a cause in the past. And not only because of cause, because of a moral cause in the past. And the universe, the way it is, the best explanation for this is that it's morally just. And that seems a bit suspect to me, And we should leave some room for chance. We should not. In Western, moral theorizing, there is a lot of talk about moral luck. If any of you are interested, there is a Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, which is a good source. Have a look on the article on moral luck. There's discussion about moral luck. Some of us can be morally lucky. Karma theory rules that out. There is no, there's no room for luck. There's no room for chance. I said, there is determinism, but it's not deterministic in the sense that we have no choice. Everything has a cause in the past. That's not determinism, but it's determinism in the sense that there is no room here at all for thinking about, that something could have happened by chance. And physics leaves that open. So you've got to take, what I've said so far positively about the karma theory, that also with the thought that it's got some problems. Okay, we'll have a 5-7 minute break and come back and start discussing the stuff about the paradox a little after 11.